time. So thank you for joining, continuing to join us. I know that it's Friday. I know that's always complicated in Istanbul. But we are really very happy to end this very long but fruitful day after two panels with the keynote speech of Axel Pohl. But first of all, we also have an announcement to make, as Hande will be organizing a workshop on Tuesday. So maybe, Hande, you can inform us about your workshop. So I'm sure that some of us are interested in and would like to join.
Thank you so much. Yeah, so continuing from this title, migration, on Tuesday on the 5th, I will be organizing a panel on position migration from Germany. So we have three speakers and a keynote speech by Professor Axel. So it will be at 2:30 p.m. here in the same room. So all of you are more than welcome to join. The event will be held on Turkish Reality.
So yeah, looking forward to the workshop Hande is organizing, and also we're also happy to host Axel Pohl here at the IPC today. Let me just read his short bio first of all. Axel Pohl is a professor for social work at the Institute for Social Work and Social Space at the Eastern Switzerland University of Applied Sciences. He has studied educational science, psychology, and sociology at the University of Tübingen in Germany, where he also got a PhD degree for study on the production of ethnicity in school-to-work transitions. In the past decades, he has worked extensively on youth transitions, youth participation, and citizenship, with a special interest in post-migrant societies, mostly within transnational research contexts, such as Horizon 2020 project, spaces and styles of youth participation, framework program 7 project, educational trajectories in Europe, and framework program 5 research project, youth policy and participation. And I was fortunate to work together with Axel in the Participate project, a Horizon project, which was a very important milestone for me. And it's always a great pleasure to have Axel to talk about transitions. As I was saying, I think it's important to introduce in our public discussions the concept of transition, and it's also important to reconcile youth and migration and mobility studies. So now the floor is yours. I know that it had been a long day, but we're really happy to have you here with us.
Yeah, thank you very much, Demet, for this nice introduction and for inviting me here. Thanks everyone at IPC, Berlin, Funda for treating me, giving me a real VIP treatment, and I can get used to that. So I will be back. So we have negotiated a bit what my role should be. And there's so many good ideas, so many questions on the table already, that I declined right away to be the conclusion to it all. So don't expect me. Of course, when you have so many complex things and uncertainty and so many crises on the table, you want to reduce complexity. So you can do that by being a genius, drawing 3 lines from here to there, or drawing the main, giving the contemporary state of the art for everything. Then you can do that. I'm not a genius, so I take a little bit of sidestep. To reduce complexity, I increase it first by introducing and making a case for this transition research perspective, which we felt was a bit a kind of a bridge, a kind of a concept that could potentially lead us to questions that would lead us from here, from this day, into the future. So that is our way of dealing with uncertainty, I think, as researchers, producing new questions. I've prepared a program. I need to, let's see that. No, it's not working. Yes. I've prepared a little program, first introducing my perspective, that you see my position looking at the whole high-skilled migration research. Then I will do what every Netflix series needs to do, what has happened until now. So I will rewind the whole story a bit, but be short with that. Then I will introduce basic concept of transition research. This might not be new to all of you, but it's also a kind of appropriating what is on the table through this lens of transitions. I concentrate then on young adulthood as a life phase, which is particularly pertinent to the field of high-skilled migration. And I argue that in a recognition perspective, we can speak of a double disregard of young adults on the move. So they are disadvantaged in two perspectives. Two of their transformations are not recognized by society, by social policies, by migration policies. So that would be my main argument. Just my perspective, where I come from, it's just over there. Behind the Alps, I'm working in St. Gallen. I study these sciences, so I never considered myself a sociologist. I never considered myself a migration researcher. So I come from social pedagogy, which is barely translatable into something like English. I've studied educational science, as Demet has said. Since then, I'm working as a professor of social work at the University of Applied Sciences in St. Gallen. So that's already a different perspective, looking at it from a social policy perspective. And my main research areas are transitions to adulthood in general, how they are formed, how we as society organize how you become adult or something you judge to be adult. And youth and young adulthood research I would consider as my core research interest. So, young people in post-migration societies, that is the rewind thing. What are the main concepts we've been using in at least the German-speaking world to talk about these migration phenomena? The first is a deficit perspective, like the language is lacking, the migrants come from a working class background, they drop all their qualifications at the gates, and they are downskilled even in the new society. So that's kind of where the German sociology and educational science come from in the 70s. Then they discovered, oh, they are young men, they have certain problems. So that's a problem and a compensatory perspective that we've come from. Then we've been through a period of like where these problems have been interpreted as like not as a double belonging thing or a potential dual citizenship, but as a cultural conflict. So all those social problems of unemployment, criminality, school failure have been culturalized and racialized in Germany, at least. So they've been ethnicized, like these people coming into Germany, and all their problems have been described and explained by their ethnicity. That's the second point. The criticism on this is quite clear, that if you do that as a researcher, you help to translate societal problems into individualized problems. So, or group problems. So that's highly problematic if you translate these things into ethnicity problems. PISA has already been mentioned, has been very, very detrimental in Germany, I would say, because it shifted the whole perspective to the parents. Like the whole school success business was shifted to the parents who did not invest enough in the school success of their children. And I have students now who argue with Bourdieu and say, oh, all those immigrant children, they are lacking cultural capital. So it's normal they are not succeeding in school. So you see, even Bourdieu can be hammered down to something very, very uncritical. And that is the effect that in Western Europe, at least, empirical educational research has had, that is blaming the parents, it's victimizing and responsibilizing parents for the failure of the school system, basically. A new perspective that has come up in the past 10 years is like discrimination critical approaches. Finally, racism was discovered as a topic in societies. Young people's experiences of racism have been discovered. Additionally to the deficit perspective, it was quite fashionable 10 or 15 years ago to reconstruct successful migration biographies. So that's also a shift in the perspective looking at migration as a phenomenon. So I just wanted to remind you of where we come from. This is a long way that we come in the past 40 years, and the struggles are not finished. So we still have a mix of these different perspectives, but you can read that as a historical line. And I think it's important to keep that in mind where the struggles are. Okay. And key concepts on that way, where I'm not going through all of them, don't be worried. Identity development and hybridity. You might remember that identity as very problematic, and all those immigrants losing their identity when they are on the move has been replaced with a more optimistic, a more differentiated view of hybridity, of double competencies in two cultures and things like that. Another one is transnational and plurilocal incorporation. That is mainly due to l'entreprise plurilocation, locatedness of assimilation, identification with countries. So you can be very well integrated in a local community. You can be politically linked to something on the other half of the earth at the same time, and that need not be necessarily problematic in itself. Another thing is like doing difference perspective is like the performance. You have to perform difference all the time. And so do like the mainstream majority institutions perform difference all the day. It's not a given how you treat children at school. It can evolve. It's not that the structure dictates how you treat children, how you treat workers. So that's quite a new perspective that is very influential at the moment. And of course, you are doing youth. It's not a given what young people are or what their position in society is, what their status is. And the last one is generation and generational sequence. We've been talking about that today at several occasions. I think it's very important to remind us of, like, of course, migration research comes from this Chicago school tradition where the cycle of generations was very important, whether you are the first generation who decided to move, whether you're the second who moved along with someone, or the third generation. So that is still very important. But I think Karl Mannheim's notion of generation is also very interesting. We're speaking about the old wave and the new wave of migration from Turkey to Germany, and that's different generations in the sense of Karl Mannheim. He says, generation has some historical context in common. So it's not a cohort. It needs to have a common reference point in history, like the 2008 crisis, the political crisis in Turkey, the Gezi process have been named. So that's constituent for a generation. And Michael Nohl took this one step further, said, we have to look into the Migrationslagerung, that is the migration generation, because there have been people moving in the 80s from Turkey to Germany for political reasons, for economic reasons. So even there, you have to differentiate what migration generation are they from. So that's my take on these central concepts. Speaking of these generations, I thought my take on this old wave, new wave thing is like the guest workers. They've been culturally, socially, and politically in a diaspora situation. They've been excluded from the German political system. They've been excluded from the social lives. They've been excluded from the culture. They've been culturalized as foreign. So they've been in a diaspora situation. They cared about the political system in Turkey and not about the system in Germany. So that is very rough lines. I mean, it's take it as that. At the same time, they hit a welfare state that was still working very well, a labor market that was not so much marked by the segmentation of the labor market like it is today. So that you have this combination of cultural, social, political exclusion or diaspora situation and structural stability, so to speak. Whereas the new wave, I mean, they are connected into a global popular culture. They are connected into global political fights, like climate change, like the wars, and so forth. So they position themselves to a global popular culture. So I'd say you can meet people in Berlin who have the same thoughts as you do if you leave now. But at the same time, you're moving into a precarious labor market. So the integration is maybe you have, in case of the physicians, you have a good position in the labor market, but then you're de-skilled. Your certificates are not recognized. So that is pretty similar to the 70s situation. But at the same time, there's a global connection. One commonality is they are young adults, people moving. It's mostly young adults who are moving. In both generations, it has been young adults. In the 60s and 70s, they were not regarded as young adults. They were not treated as young adults. They were treated as workers, female and male. Female discovered much later in the literature, oh, there were women, oh, so many. For a long time, Germany kept the image of like, it's a male worker coming and going back after 2 years when he has saved enough money. So there was a discovery of the 80s that there were women migrating in the first generation and not in very small parts. Second commonality between these generations is they have to do a double transition. They do a transition from one country to the other, and they do a transition from young adulthood to adulthood or establishing themselves. Okay. So you can look at, I need to stand up, sorry. Is that okay with the camera? The transitions to adult life, some historical lines again. It started with the rite d'initiation, rite de passage by Van Gennep. Ethnologists discovered, how do children become adults? There is some kind of ritual to make them grown up. In Christianity, you do this, in Islam, you do that, and in other societies, you do that to signify you're no longer a child, you belong to the adults. Victor Turner described this ritual process that made you become adults in depth. Glaser and Strauss, two sociologists from the US, coined the term of status passages. So we pass from one status to another one. In Germany, Sackmann and Wingens from the University of Bremen declared a transition is the passage from status A to status B. So very simple. Status A is student, status B is worker or employee. Status A is unmarried, status B is married. Status A is childless, status B is a parent. So that's their take on status passages. And of course, this is a very monadic model of transition to adulthood. There's only one step to go. You have youth here somewhere at the age groups of 15 until 18, maybe, or several societies define that differently. And you have a certain status that is declared adulthood. And it's one step, you take one ritual, and then you're there. Then youth research discovered in the past 50 years that this becomes longer and longer with mass education establishing itself. So it became prolonged, the phase where you're in the state in between. And you reach this point later if you go to school longer, if you visit university. So, but still it was regarded as a linear and homogeneous status passage. Now you can ask yourself, what does it lead? What is good for this concept? Of course, ethologically, you can look at these rituals. How do we construct adulthood in society? Recently, a colleague of mine from Frankfurt has researched in initiation ceremonies, the laicystic secular thing in the old GDR, in the German Democratic Republic, because the 80% were not part of a church or any Christian community. So the state invented a ritual for them, and it has persisted. You can now find that still a ritual for 14-year-old girls and boys, where they celebrate, drink their first glass of sparkling wine. So that's what Julia Breschow found out. And you can say, of course, there's migration is a rite of passage. You have this one day where you pack your things. We've heard about, oh, the cat and the husband is still missing, the certificate is still missing. So when will you celebrate? When will you raise glass? So we have to somehow put that on stage. You have to integrate that into your identity or whatever you mean by into your subjectivity. Okay. So next is we can look at the transition in different status passages. Like I said, maybe one is like moving out from your parents' home, qualify in some form for any kind of job, develop your own romantic relationships, your identity as a person. So you can look at that as a life phase composed of prolonged and diversified status passages. Maybe it takes longer to leave your parents' home than to find out who you are sexually, corporally. Maybe it takes longer to qualify for the labor market. So that's a new perspective that brings about new perspectives. Like the institutionalization of the life course was described by Crony in the 80s, that in the Western industry societies, you have a certain model of a life course that is expectable for most people. Like you will not work until you're 18, then you will work not in one enterprise for 40 years, then you will be retired, and then you have 20 years left. This was later discovered is for the male breadwinner model in Germany. This was true for many men. It was not true for people who had migrated. It was never true for women. So it was a very male-centric model of thinking of the standard life course. All this was discovered in a huge research program in Bremen, States Passages and the Risks in the Life course, running for 13 years, discovering new aspects, therefore. Of course, youth unemployment became very predominant in the 1980s, when youth unemployment was very high in Western Europe. Even like model states like Sweden had 50% of youth unemployment rates. So that was very predominant in transition research. Labor market integration later still is an issue, and still new transitions have been discovered with this concept of like status passages, like the transition into pension, the transition into kindergarten has to be organized somehow. Is there a ritual? How do we look at children entering kindergarten and so forth? So it has differentiated in many ways. The criticism that has risen on this, like looking at the status passages and these transitions, is we always look at them from the perspective of institutions. So we're looking at the labor market integration or the transition into a labor market from a labor market state perspective. Are you successful or not is not judged by you, but by the labor market itself. So Wolfgang Schröer called it the methodological institutionalism of transition research. So that inherent in these ideas of the transitions is an idea of functioning institutions. So they define success. Earlier, colleagues of mine and myself, we talked about subject-oriented transition research. So turning this perspective from the institutions to the individuals and looking at how they experience their transitions. Schröer's main argument, as I said, was the predominance of a normative perspective that defined the success from school, labor market, and so forth. Okay, then, and third model I want to introduce is that what we call a yo-yo model of transitions. And then you see the flashes got two ends now. They are closer together. And that is to say that all these transitions, like becoming independent of your parents' home, becoming independent financially, developing a sexual orientation, qualifying, they can be fragmented against each other. They can be at the same time. They can be in very different periods of your life. And still, society assumes with at the age of 14, you live with your parents, you will do an apprenticeship, or you will finish school. At 18, you will move to university, and so forth. And if you deviate from that model, you will be sanctioned. Nobody will help you. Sometimes they will put you into special treatment. But at the same time, with the prolongation, and the uncertainty of these perspectives, there's also a certain reversibility. I can move out of my parents' home, go to study in a different city, and then everything goes down. I quit studies. I have to move back to my parents' home because I cannot sustain myself financially. Or I can become a father here, not having finished my university studies. So then things get complicated for mother as well. Okay, we have this research network, or we developed that in the 90s and 2000s, is called IGRIS, European Group on Integrated Research, Social Research, and worked on this discovery of young adulthood as a new life phase that is between youth and adulthood. Because the prolongation of these yo-yo things, it's not, okay, I go through that and it's very short period and then I find a ritual to become adult. No, it's prolonging. In some societies, I don't know the average age when young men are leaving home in Turkey. In Italy, it's 35, I think. In Spain, it's 33. In Sweden, it's 21. In Germany, it's 25, I think, 24, 25. So that's a whole new life phase that is developing with own cultural patterns. And one thing that came to my mind this afternoon was like we always distinguish between transition and trajectory. Transition rather being my personal, subjective, biographical coping with these structural things. And trajectory rather designing like the trajectory of a rocket is given, but it can turn either way. So the society prescribes or has institutionalized a certain trajectory for me. You can't stay at university for 3 years, then you have to quit. You can, if you become a parent too early, we have a certain support system for you. So that is a trajectory. It's like the road. And the transition is like we are driving with our bikes or with our cars on that road. Sometimes we bump into each other. So that's a distinction I found useful, but it has been used differently, I think, today. Okay, I'm speeding up a bit, sorry. Okay, yo-yo transitions. I said central features of these transitions are reversibility, because developmental psychology put status passages as a one-way thing. You develop more and more independence, more and more autonomy. This was already challenged by feminist research in the 90s, saying this is a male model of development, of human development. A female, typical female life course would be not more and more autonomy, but acquiring more and more responsibility when you found your own family. So this was already questioned in the 90s. So that's the reversibility. It's not moving from less autonomy to more and more autonomy, but there's a way back maybe. Then the fragmentation, I already told you about that. You can always be too early, too late with motherhood. You can be very early, you can be very late, and society will let you know. So these transitions are fragmented against each other. In Germany, very important, the vocational training system still assumes you're 14 and you work, you eat with your parents, you live at your parents' place, so you get a recompensation for full-time work of 300 euro. So nobody can live in Germany on that independently, but that's still the idea, is like these things can be fragmented against each other. So there can be contradictions that you have to solve on your own. Last point is the interdependence, of course, of these transitions. If I do it in the wrong order, get the child first and the qualification next, marry then, that's the wrong order, and they will let you know, or society will let you know that this is wrong order. Either they don't support you, or cultural patterns will tell you that you're wrong. Okay, where can we this? How can we link that in what we heard today? I thought of, are migration decisions not reversible these days? Is it a one-way decision? I can remember from the 90s, the myth of returning home among the guest workers, had many, many functions for the communities. It was like, okay, we experienced the same racism. I know that you experienced it as well. So there was a glue in the communities to say, sometimes we will return home, not in a coffin, but sitting in the plane. So that had many functions for them. Of course, migration, as we said, is also a generation project. It's for the children. So my legitimation is my children should have lead a better life. So that hasn't changed. But then also I will return if things turn bad. Is maybe not a real option, but can be a symbolic solution for many, many problems. If I keep the door open, if I keep links to my home country or whatever. And of course, what is under-researched so far is the interaction of migration with other transitions. We've been talking about motherhood. Of course, that's important. We can talk about qualification. Okay, high-skilled people moving after finishing their degree. What about these? So saying, is there no low-skilled migration anymore? So that can be looked upon, or I think the transition perspective could be helpful into looking at the intersection of these transitions with migration processes. Okay, last point, adulthood, what should that be? Nobody knows. Of course, with transition research is developing, so some recent perspectives have been summarized by Walter and colleagues. The social construction of transition, what is a transition, what is recognized as something you need support in, the relational character, as you said, of transitions. And the reflective turn in research is like not take the categories as given, student, deconstruct these categories, deconstruct motherhood, deconstruct and so forth. So you might be familiar with it. Okay, finally, the recognition perspective. Don't go there, turn left is the sign for that. I've been talking about the double disregard of young adults on the move as young migrants, as young adults, and as migrants. So they don't want to be called migrants, they want to be called expats. This, in my opinion, a symbolic solution to the experience of not being recognized as full members of a trade, as a physician, of a citizenship, and so forth. So that is one disregard. The other is they are not regarded as young adults. They are regarded as workers, workforce, nothing else. So there's no idea of the German state of saying we need housing. Of course, I know in the medical sector, they have these hospital dorms or hospital like the facilities for newly arriving personnel. But there's nothing, there's no social life there. It's just they're left alone. Oh, you're an adult, you will find your way. And I know from Tübingen Hospital, at least, I have a couple of friends working there, they say there's no one there from the wave of Italian personnel coming that have arrived 2 years ago. They all moved back because they felt so lonely. And Italy and Germany has a long tradition of like pendulating migration, so it should be easy to organize reversibility. So I think a double transition or double transformation, as some of my colleagues have called it, must be recognized as such in policy making. So there should be a reflection of this double disregard of the migration situation and the transition situation from youth to adulthood. In research, don't know. So research, we need to, I think this event is brilliant for that. Like make migration experts talk to youth experts and vice versa. Because to my knowledge, the bridges are not so densely disseminated all over Europe. Sometimes we speak different languages, also in methodology. I was glad today that I understood at first sight all methods that had been applied, because in life course research sometimes they get really, really complicated and very, very differentiated methods of event history things. So we're developing, I think, in different directions in migration and in youth research, and therefore this event is so important to make these two perspectives speak to each other. Last point, the looks of the social question are changing. You see these ladies with the drums doing a rally at the Ibis Hotel in the Parisian periphery. The basics remain the same. It's still a social question. They are battling for good working conditions. So that's from 2019. And so I leave you with the social question, and thank you for your attention, for having me at this late afternoon time on Friday. Thank you very much. Please, comments are always welcome.